Hi everyone, my name is Caris and welcome back to my corner of the internet where I talk about books and other things that I enjoy. A few things before we start today's video. First of all, today's outfit is very much inspired by this picture of me, which I'm going to put here, I guess, of when I was 3. If you need proof that fashion trends come back in every 20 years or so, then this is it. I have a ring light now. I got one because I had these two massive soft boxes and to be honest I'm just too lazy to keep putting them up and they were quite old and sort of broken. So I got a ring light. Jury's out on whether I actually like it or not. I'm not sure. I literally spent about 20 minutes playing around with it and couldn't decide which setting looked the best. So I've gone with this. I just had to go with it because I thought that if I messed around with it any longer then I would eventually talk myself out of actually filming the video. That's not what the video is about today. The video that I'm going to be doing today is talking about the last 10 books that I added to my TBR. So 10 reads that I'm really anticipating. So these are the books that I most recently added to my Storygraph TBR. Storygraph is a alternative to Goodreads. If you haven't heard of it before, I would highly recommend going and checking it out because I just love it so much. I prefer it to Goodreads so much, and I decided that if I did a video every 10 or so books that I added to my TBR, then it might be a really nice thing to do, because most of the times when I add books to my TBR it's because I've seen a booktuber recommend them or I've seen someone on Twitter talking about it, and I thought it might be a nice way of combining books with some of my favourite booktubers. So in this first video I'm going to try and mention where I got the recommendations from if I can remember, but because I hadn't planned to do this video as I was adding them to my TBR, I don't think I'm going to remember for every single one. So I've just counted 10 books down my TBR, so I'm going to go from the one I added the longest ago right up to the one I added most recently. So the first book that I want to mention is a book called Night Shift by Kira Ladner, and the basic premise of this book is that it follows a young woman, I think she's 23, and she gives up her day job in order to begin working night shifts with this other woman. In doing so she also sacrifices a lot of other things in her life, like spending time with her boyfriend, and I think in this woman she initially sees everything that she wants to be, but then as the story develops the way she sees this woman becomes possibly a little more obsessive, and that's all I really know about it. I'm not sure if it's going to be a thriller or if it's going to be more of a psychological tale in general, but I was just so intrigued when I heard the premise of this. The person that I heard talking about this was Rachel from the channel Reader in the Right. I'll leave a link to Rachel's channel and anyone else that I mentioned in this video in the description, but when I heard her talking about it I was like, oh, that sounds really intriguing, I have to add it to my TBR. I feel like an area of literature that I really would like to read more into, because the premise definitely really appeals to me, is stories centered around young people around my age and women in particular who are sort of going into the world of work, navigating their way through life, not really having a clue what they're doing, because same, that is the sort of story that I want to read about, and this sounds like it could be that, but then ultimately with a darker twist, and I do love when stories take a little bit of a darker turn. The second thing that I recently added to my TBR was Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. I have to admit, I have not read Homegoing. I've heard amazing things and I really need to get around to it. I have it on my shelf in my flat. My friend lent it to me back in like January or February last year, so I do really need to pick that one up this year. But nonetheless, when I saw the blurb of her second book, I knew that I had to add it to my TBR, and it's one that I definitely want to get around to eventually. So this book is another one I think that sort of follows the life of a young woman navigating her way through life and the various things that life throws at her. I will just read you the blurb of this one because I feel like it's got a lot more threads that the blurb is going to do a lot better of a job at describing than I can. It's described as a powerful, raw, intimate, deeply layered novel about a Ghanaian family in Alabama. Gifty is a fifth-year candidate in neuroscience at Stanford School of Medicine, studying reward-seeking behaviour in mice and the neural circuits of depression and addiction. Her brother, Nana, was a gifted high school athlete who died of a heroin overdose after a knee injury left him hooked on OxyContin. Her suicidal mother is living in her bed. Gifty is determined to discover the scientific basis for the suffering she sees all around her. But even as she turns to the hard sciences to unlock the mysteries of her family's loss, she finds herself hungering for her childhood faith and grappling with the evangelical church in which she was raised, whose promise of salvation remains as tantalizing as it is elusive. Yeah, I'm particularly interested in this one about the depictions of mental illness, and the character of the brother definitely intrigues me because I have a lot of thoughts about being gifted as a child and being told that you're gifted that is not for today's video. It might never become a video, but I've never really seen that topic looked at in a book before, and I wonder if this is going to go into that. I assume it's going to because it's mentioned on the blurb. The next thing that I added to my TBR was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I'm sure most people probably know what this book is about because it's probably one of the books that I had talked about most in 2020, but basically it's the story of William Shakespeare's son. And that is all that I really know about it, but that's all that anyone seems to say in their videos as well, so I'm assuming that it's one that you just go into and then the story sort of unfolds as you read it. And I wouldn't attribute the reason that this is on my TBR to a certain booktuber because I've heard about it everywhere, but I think my sort of inspiration for wanting to read it has possibly been fueled a bit by Shannon from 155 Books' love and discussions on her channel of Shakespeare over the past year. So Shannon was doing a challenge last year where she read a different Shakespeare play every single month, and I've just really enjoyed watching those videos. I did Shakespeare when I was at uni, but I only studied his texts in my first year. I did a Shakespeare module. I wouldn't say that I was the biggest Shakespeare fan, admittedly, but I also think that I haven't really ever sat down and tried to appreciate them. I think although I chose to do an English degree, I still, all the way through my degree, had that certain sense of like, if I'm being told to read it, I'm probably not going to enjoy it that much. And I think that is where I sort of stand with Shakespeare at the moment. However, this obviously isn't an actual Shakespeare story, and he is a person that definitely interests me. He was born and lived very near to where I live and where I grew up, and Stratford is a place where I go to a lot. That's why it's on the TBR, and I hope I find it as amazing as the other people that I've heard talk about it. The next book I added to my TBR was People Like Her by Ellery Lord. Again, I think that it was in Rachel's video where I saw this. I'm pretty sure it was her that I heard speaking about it. So this book is a thriller, and it follows the life of a woman who is a mummy blogger, and she's sort of gaining a lot of success and popularity, and that increase in success is possibly going to begin threatening her marriage, her security, and her family life in general. I really hope that I like this. I feel like thrillers always appeal to me, and I always think I'm gonna love them, but they do have a tendency to let me down if they're not done really, really well. I think over the last year or so, I've sort of started to understand that I prefer mystery stories. I like having a detective character to follow along with as opposed to thrillers, but I'm hoping that I will enjoy this one because I'm really interested in the mummy blogger element of this book. I don't really follow any family vloggers. I know of some. I used to follow a couple more when I was younger, but even then I only watched like the odd video and I was familiar with the family rather than like watching every single vlog. But it's a phenomenon that's always sort of intrigued me, and if this book goes into depth or looks into the pros and cons, I guess, of that lifestyle, then I think it could be a really good one. The next thing I added was After the Silence by Louise O'Neill, which I do actually own, but I can't be bothered to go and get it off my bookshelf. So here's a picture. This follows a murder that took place 10 years ago but has never been solved. No one ever knows what really happened, and then 10 years later in the present, a documentary team come to the place where this all happened. I assume that they're going to find out what really happened, and that's where this story is going to go. I added this to my TBR because it was on my radar and I already owned it and I just didn't have it there already, so I belatedly added it to the TBR. But I'm planning on reading this one in March for the Irish Readathon. I've read Asking for It by Louise O'Neill before and I really loved that book, so I'm planning on getting to this one and the other books of hers that I have unread on my shelves during that readathon. I hope I'm gonna love it. I do love true crime. I love watching videos that talk all about true crime stories. I love listening to true crime podcasts, so I'm hoping that there's gonna be vibes of that in this book. The next book on my TBR is Promising Young Woman by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is one that I'm gonna read the blurb out for. I don't know why, but some books I can read the blurb on Storygraph, Goodreads, whatever, and I know what to say about them, but others I just don't know how to eloquently put it into words, and this is one of them, and honestly you don't want to see me stumbling over my words trying, so I may as well just read it. This one says, on the day of her 26th birthday, Jane is recently single, adrift at her job and intrigued by why Clem, her much older married boss, is singing to her. Meanwhile, her alter ego, the online agony aunt Jolly Politely, has all the answers. She's provided hundreds of strangers with insightful and occasionally cutting insights to contemporary life's most vexing questions. When she and Clem kiss at a party, Jane does not follow the advice she would give to her readers as Jolly. Instead, she plunges headfirst into an affair, one that could jeopardise her friendships, her career, and even her life. So I think, not entirely sure, that I heard Leanne from Leanne Rose talking about this book. I'm going to check before I actually upload this, and if it wasn't her, then I will just cut this bit out so you'll never know that I said that. But again, this book sort of treads the line of that person in their 20s finding their way in life sort of vibe that I'm really loving at the moment. And I've never read a book that features an affair before. That element of it intrigues me. I've said the word intrigue so many times in this video. And I also like the idea of the sort of dual personality, your online self versus who you are in person. Obviously in this book it seems like it's being taken to a real extreme. The next thing on my TBR is All Girls by Emily Layden, and this is another one that I'm going to read the blurb for. It says, an all-girls boarding school in a hilly corner of Connecticut, Atwater, is a haven for progressive thinking and feminist intellectuals. The students are smart, driven and worldly. They are also teenagers learning to find their way, but when they arrive on campus for the start of fall term, they're confronted with startling news. An Atwater alumna has made a troubling allegation of sexual misconduct against an unidentified teacher. As the weeks wear on and the administration's efforts to manage the ensuing crisis fall short, these extraordinary women come to realise that the adults in their lives may not be the protectors they previously believed. But the bit that really sold me on this was the bit that says, the ways that our culture looks to young women as trendsetters but otherwise silences their views and discounts their opinions. I was like, wow, we love to see it. That I want to see that discussion in a book that I'm reading. This honestly has so many buzzwords for me. I love in general anything that's set in a boarding school setting, and the fact that this is going to look into really important topics such as mental health and sexual assault, and also have this feminist slant, just sounds like everything that I like to read about rolled into one book. And I think it's going to be very important, and I hope it does the story that I think it's going to tell justice. The next thing I added to my TBR was I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. So this is a memoir, and I believe it tells of Maggie's 17 near-death experiences or encounters, and that's all I really know about it. But I think if I enjoy Hamnet, then I'll pick this one up, but I'm going to probably wait until I've read Hamnet first. I haven't really ever read memoirs before, but as I'm trying to broaden my horizons and sort of expand my reading tastes, I thought, why not give one a go? To be honest, the main reason why I added it to my TBR is because I've always loved the title of it, because I Am is how the bell jar by Sylvia Plath ends, and that's one of my favourite books of all time. So I assume that that's what inspired the title, and that alone is enough to make me want to pick it up to see if there is actually any other reference to the bell jar in this book. Okay, this next one, if you are subscribed to Books That Matter and you don't want to know what was in the January box because you haven't got it yet, then I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds to skip to the time that I'm showing on the screen now if you want to see the last book that I've got on my TBR, because the next one I got in that box. So here's the timestamp. Okay, right, the next thing on my TBR is Skin by E.M. Reapy, and as I said, I got this in the January Books That Matter subscription box. I hadn't heard of this book before I received it, but upon reading the blurb, I think this character has real potential to be someone that I relate to so much. I read it and I was like, is this me? So this book follows a young woman who is sort of feeling a bit like lost, and she gives up her job as a teacher and decides to just travel the world full time. And it's sort of a bit of a journey of her finding herself, but there's also a theme running through it of struggling with her weight and accepting her own body. And I think she ultimately goes to these places to find herself and realizes that she still feels a bit lost. There's so many elements of this book I think I can really relate to. I'm planning on getting to this one probably not in January now, but if not in January, then in February. And the final book that I recently added onto my TBR is We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayan. And this is another one that I just saw on like Instagram or something, so there's no one in particular that has included it in a video that like recommended it, but I thought it sounded really good. And another important one, the blurb says, 2 lives generations apart, set to collide with life-changing consequences. Uganda, the late 1960s. Hassan, the son of an Indian immigrant, runs a successful business in Kampala together with his extended family. But Hassan is heartbroken as he struggles to cope with the untimely death of his wife. With anti-immigrant sentiment on the rise, growing racial divides threaten to uproot everything he and his family have worked so hard to build. London, present day. Samir is a Cambridge graduate and high-flying lawyer on track for a life-changing promotion. But despite his success, Samir feels lost. The life he's longed for is only making him miserable. After a tragedy calls him back to his family home in Leicester, Samir finds himself caught between a future he's always believed he wanted and a past he struggles to fit back into. Moving between 2 continents and over a troubled century, We Are All Birds of Uganda is a multi-layered, moving and immensely resonant novel of generational love, loss and what it means to find home. So I think the blurb for this one speaks for itself. It just, again, sounds like such an important story. I think it's going to be very powerful, and I'm really excited to read a book set in Uganda because my company has a guidebook to that. I've not edited it myself, but I've taken in a lot of knowledge about a lot of different countries, and Uganda is one of them. So I'm just excited to visit that setting in this book. And also the switching between the past and present, I think that that's really cool. The only book that I can think of that I've read recently that does that is The Muse by Jessie Burton, although that is a lot further back in the past. But I really loved that book, and I thought the format really worked. So I hope it does in this. I think it will be really interesting to see how the 2 characters are connected eventually. So that was it for the books that I recently added to my TBR. I hope you enjoyed this video. As I said, I'm planning on making it into a full series on my channel, so I hope that that's something that people are interested in. If you've read any of these books, I would love to know if you enjoyed them and if you think they're worthy of a place on my TBR, or just let me know if they're ones that you're intrigued to read as well. Other than that though, that is it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're all keeping safe and staying well, and I will see you again next time. Bye!